Hey guys, this is Hell Hades. This is a Raid Shadow Legends video. Guys, got quite an interesting topic here for Raid Shadow Legends. One I've not spoken about in a while, but I did watch this J Diggs video here. Shout out to J Diggs for the work that he does. He was saying Raid is about to have a huge problem. So I thought, oh, what now? What's coming up next? But it basically talks about the new clan versus clan feature that's coming in, the siege, the stronghold, and pretty much positively says, you know, this should be good for the game. But do we already have too much to do in Raid Shadow Legends? Does the game take up too much of our time? Is it basically getting to a point where people have left already, or people are leaving because it's like, I just don't have time to play this game in full? And it is a good question because Raid have actually made some changes, like a reasonable amount of changes over the last couple of years. And does this kind of like frustration still exist? That's the question. And it definitely ebbs and flows, right? Because if we are full on in fusion mode, and then it's fusion into get the soul for that fusion, and it's like this never ending, you've just got to grind in this game, then it's definitely worse, right? That moment in time is definitely worse. But I thought what I'd do is just kind of like start to document some of the stuff we're doing in the game and give my views on kind of like, you know, how does it feel nowadays versus in the past? And does it feel like actually it's an issue? Especially with this new feature that's coming in, which is it's obviously going to take up time, probably a decent amount of time if you want to play this game mode properly. And what's interesting as well is where you are in the game massively changes how much time you spend on some of these things. Like when I'm doing a free-to-play account and I'm all in, and you know, you've got that new to the game energy, which is different, honestly, from somebody who's played the game for years and years. I've played the game now for 5 odd years, and you know, the kind of I get spells of that energy when I find something really fun, like when I got the Wixwell team going, and literally I was just playing with different teams, constantly like trying to iterate on that kind of comp. Super fun to do, but then you fall back into, well, I'm now running teams. Okay, so there's an element I've put in here which is building teams, which when you're full on in trying to improve everything, this could actually be like a massive time sink if you want it to be. And if you don't do this and you're trying to improve, well, how do you improve if you're not improving your team? So, you know, building teams, I think, is a fundamental part of Raid Shadow Legends. It's actually one of the best things about Raid, but also one of the challenging things around time. So let's go through then and see realistically what it looks like in today's world. I did put a little one on there for closing pop-ups, because closing pop-ups or just quickly doing stuff, because sometimes you could spend a good few seconds closing pop-ups. Let's say in a day, I reckon I spend 3 minutes at least closing them down. I also put on there the marketplace. Okay, nothing there. Okay, so 1 second on the marketplace because it's so trash. So let's get those out of the way. Anyway, let's get into the real stuff. So yeah, clan boss. How different is it depending on how far through the game you are? Is the first question. So when I am playing very early game, clan boss is quite quick. You go in there, you do easy, normal, or hard. The runs take less than 3 minutes probably, because you don't have the quality of team to make it last longer. You then move into what I would say the mid and towards late game, and you're kind of doing brutal nightmare, moving on to ultra nightmare. You're trying to maximize your teams. You're trying to get the best out of your runs, because this is where the rewards are, and that can take up to 15-20 minutes a run, potentially, definitely 10 minutes for this kind of like mid group. And then you've got 4 keys of that to do. So we're probably talking, I'd say, an hour of your time for clan boss until you get to the point where you can just hit quick battle, and then it goes back down to like 10 seconds, or maybe call it 30 seconds all in. So very different depending on where you are in the game. Maybe we'll split this into like early, mid, and then late game, because for me, clan boss is maximum probably 1 minute, honestly, maybe 2 minutes if I'm looking at the gear that pops out. So that's very different now to, crikey, my Excel skills are a bit lacking here. Let's just pump these bad boys up a little bit. yeah, so it's very different now depending on where you are in the game, because early mid clan boss can be potentially an hour, right? So it could be like 60 minutes of your day. I'd say more realistically, probably 40, maybe 30. Let's say 30 for an average player. Still quite a lot of time though. And JDX's argument actually in his video was, once we've got a team that we like and works for us, shouldn't we be able to just quick battle straight away? Shouldn't that just be an option irrelevant of whether you can one key or not? And I think the counter to that is you're kind of taking away an element of the game, which is one of the best elements of the game, because you don't get to... I don't play clan boss anymore. Not that I need to, I guess. I played it for so long. But once you get to the point where you're just auto-completing, are you playing the game anymore? It's an interesting question. I don't know what the answer is there. I prefer to play a game than to just auto-complete stuff. I played a bunch of games, by the way, where you auto-complete all the content. I stopped playing the game so quick. It's boring. It's a boring way to play a game. So I'm not in for straight auto-completing all content, but I am in for balance. So it might be that once content becomes irrelevant to a player, like Clan Boss has become to me, I guess, that this auto-complete is a good function to get the time back for that player to then be able to put that time into something new or interesting. Let's talk Arena quickly then. So Arena, again, depends on where you are in the game. Or does it? No, I think Arena is pretty consistent. I'd say, if anything, Arena, the way it changes is if you've actually completed your Great Hall. And that is someone who is super late game. That's someone who's, you know, played the game literally for years. So completing the Great Hall is the game changer. Because now, the only reason I've got to do Arena is to get my extra energy in a day, which I do every day. So I do 5 battles a day now. So I get my extra energy, and if there's like a tournament running or something like that, or an event running where I want to try and actually win stuff, then obviously I'll do more hits. But for me, Arena is 5 hits, which is probably the best part of 1 to 2 minutes. But obviously, again, when I was playing the free-to-play account, I used every single Arena hit that I could do because I wanted to progress my account. I wanted to progress my Great Hall. And at that point, Arena actually becomes really intensive of your time, but over the stretch of the day. Because the more often you can refresh your page and try and find opponents that you can actually fight, the better the Arena rank becomes for you and the more rewards you're going to get. So I'd say this one flips quite heavily again, depending on where you are in the game. Now, obviously, if you are someone who really loves Arena and you play Arena a ton, then this becomes more like one of the places where you spend most of your time. So I guess, you know, like a Papa Drock or something like that. Maybe it's not in this type of arena. Maybe it's live arena, actually. But definitely, you spend a lot more time building teams. You spend a lot more time, you know, messing around with champions and comps. And, you know, arena can end up being quite a lengthy process. But you can see here, just for me to do my 5, it's going to take me a couple of minutes, versus the average player, where they're taking... I'd say this can take, in your day, a good hour all in, if you're just someone who's trying to build up your Great Hall. Mainly because if you're playing actively, you're trying to come back in and look for those fights that you can actually win. Arena, I think, is in quite a bad state for the average player, because everybody tries to get themselves up into Gold 5. Obviously, if you're someone who's played for less than a year, chances are you can't beat any of these teams, so you're just looking for easy wins. And that's a different problem, I guess. But so for Arena, for me, let's say for the average player, it's probably, I don't know, 3 minutes. But for earlier players, I'd say at least 30 minutes of your day. Probably more like 45 minutes, honestly. If you're active. Now, let's stick with 30 for a more casual player. But still, that's a lot of time, right? So I need to add live arena in here. Didn't put that one in. Okay, so let's talk 3 versus 3, which is basically the same again. So, again, depends how you play it, right? If you do all of your hits, which is your 20 hits in a day, and you play it where you drop really low every day. Yes, you put a no defense in, you drop low, and you tank so that you do easy hits. 20 hits is still going to take you a decent chunk of time, right? So, 20 hits in a day. I play 3v3 super casually, okay? Super casually. I think the bizarre is bizarre that they don't add better rewards. If I win or lose, I'm not that fussed. I don't really look at my opponent particularly. I don't really select the teams that I should fight with. But then arena's not necessarily really my passion. I much prefer PvE content than PvP. So I guess maybe that's one of the reasons for it. But there's been spells where I've really pushed over the years, and it can be very time intensive, especially if you're trying to, first jump from, say, silver 4 to gold 1, for example. It's really hard to do for the average player. Yeah, so again, depends on how actively you're playing, depends on the challenges around you. But even for me, so doing 5 fights at this level, and I think that kind of flows down pretty well to other levels, honestly. It's a long process. 5 fights is a long process in the game. And we're going to see one set of fights here where I've just gone auto. And again, there is a question here to say on a lot of these things, how actively are you playing? Okay, so, if you're building teams, you are literally there doing the thing, versus if you're, running comps. Yeah, I do a lot of this whilst I'm doing other stuff, honestly. Yeah, I've got it on another monitor. I'm in a Fateless meeting or something, and I'm like, live arena. 3v3. Just get my hits away. Yeah, so that's a different type of playing versus when I'm really pushing and I'm looking at my opponents and I'm trying to win and all that type of stuff. And in that case, you spend more time in the prep, and I think you still spend a good amount of time in the fights, honestly. 3v3 really is a long process. So for me, doing 5 hits in a day, I'd say it probably still takes me at least 15 minutes of gameplay. If I tanked my rank so that I could just get my quick hits in, it's probably, less than 5 minutes. But then what you have, the reverse of that is you have to regrow at some point during the week. And that's actually why I don't tend to tank my rank all the time anymore, because when I get to the back end of the week, I actually play raid less. Like over the weekend, I play raid less than I do during the week. And for me personally, the amount of times I drop down because I just forget about the, I forget to, in time, to get myself back up. So, but you can see there, I mean, that was quite long, as a few minutes. So I'd say that's got to be a 15-minute minimum. 15-minute minimum if you do 5 hits in a day. If I'm doing 20 hits, obviously you multiply that up, and that's more like 60 minutes. And again, so this could range anywhere from someone spending 5 minutes in a day up to 60 minutes, I'd say. Let's put for an average player, let's call it 20 minutes. All right, so Doom Tower next. Doom Tower is something I still do every day. Normally, I don't know why I didn't finish up yesterday, but normally I do my 10 levels in a day. And after that, I'll hit a boss with my extra keys. Okay, so, and I think most people at least will hit the boss with their extra keys. So they'll do the 7 hits. Now they've added super raids in here, so it's 7 hits instead of 15, which was better. I still think, I think you should be able to just clear all of your keys with one run in something like Doom Tower. So you still have to do the run for the day, but you're allocating how many keys you want to use. I think that would just be better for the boss encounters, because that way you've still got to have proof that you can beat the boss, but you don't have to have proof 7 times in a row or 15 times in a row or whatever. So I think that would still be better, because this is quite a time sink, especially if I remember on the free to play, beating the bosses here, it takes a lot longer on a free to play than it does for me. For me, it might be a minute run or less, depending on whether I've got a team that I've actually tuned for it properly. And on my free to play, you could get up to, if you're just trying to beat a boss, it could take me 15 minutes. Also, on the free to play, I seem to remember that just beating a level, when you're really trying to get that progression in, you have to be way more active. And that can be, again, 5-6 minutes per level. If you're playing super actively and you're trying to better your account and get these rewards and all that type of stuff. So there's definitely massive variances. And I think that's what's quite hard about this topic. But, I'd say on average, just beating the boss 7 times, doing your extra 10 levels growth per day, you've got to be talking minimum 30 minutes, right? And then you've got secret rooms on top of that. If it depends how actively you play the game. So let's say for me, 30 minutes of runtime, that's probably a bit over actually. Maybe for me, it's more like 25 minutes, but still a decent chunk. For an early mid game, it could range anywhere from, 10 minutes if you haven't got any levels that you can beat anymore and you've just given up on it, all the way up to easily an hour, I think. Easily. So big variances, I think, here. Faction Wars, again, kind of Faction Wars ties into, I think, building teams. So on the free-to-play in the early game, I'm building champions, not necessarily super well, but I'm building champions for this. And I'm trying to get extra levels done in Faction Wars. So, you know, probably spent the best part of 30 minutes, maybe, a day. Is that way over? Maybe it's way over. So call it 15 minutes a day minimum in Faction Wars, building out champs and stuff. And then actually running Faction Wars. Again, massive variance, right? If I'm just going in and autoing stuff that I've already beaten, so end game, that's where I'm at. Unless I've got a mission that says for me to do 21, I will do 20 personally. So it's just faster, it's just a quicker run. And obviously I'd always do the 2 runs. I'd do it so that I do my 3v3 first, then we come into here, we get the couple of runs done. Again, I could tune faster running teams, okay? And I've got some which are, like my Demon Spawn's 20 seconds or something. But some of them, like this one, I literally just throw in 5 champions that have got some sort of build. So depending on how actively you prioritize your teams and work your teams out, this can become massively different. But this is an end game experience. Let's call it, it's going to be about a minute per run. And I do 4 of those runs per day. And that can spike all the way up, obviously, to a couple of minutes per run. So call it 10 minutes in a day. And that's in the end game. I think you just literally go in and get your stuff done. But in the early game, it can be anything from, because you're trying to progress a number of different levels. You might be actively manualing fights because you need to. And it could be anywhere from 10 up to 30 minutes, I'd say, maybe more. So again, could be one of these ones where there's a massive variance depending on how actively you're playing the game. I guess that's the same for anything really. But events and dungeons, again, they've added super raids into a bunch of stuff. So they've added super raids into most of the dungeons, not all, but most. And you know, if you use all of your energy in a day, let's say you have 1,000 energy a day, roughly. You know, I don't think it's too bad time to spend your energy anymore. I don't think it's too crazy. The fact they've got super raids on all the time, again, depends how good your teams are, right? But if you're talking on average 2 to 3 minutes per run, and a run's 40 energy, well, 40 into 1,000, what's that? 5 times 5, 25 runs, 25 times 3. We're talking, again, it's probably, is it an hour of time? Is that right? That can't be right. 1,000 energy, divide that by 40, so it's 25 runs. Yeah, damn, times 3. So if it was a 3-minute run, it's over an hour. If it's a 2-minute run, it's about 50 minutes. Maybe 1,000 energy. Is that being super generous? I think you probably over the course of a day do get close to that, honestly. So, okay, maybe it's anywhere between, and you know, and if I'm doing Spider, it's like 10-second runs for me. So it could be anywhere between, let's call it 20 minutes and 60 minutes here. And I think that's probably the same here. This pumps up, I guess, if you're doing things like fusions, if you're hard trying to like force content. If you're just doing the daily day, then yeah, not as bad. But if you're trying to push content, this can be longer, I guess. And there's an element, I would assume, of building teams in here. There's probably an element of building teams generally here. 30 minutes a day, maybe that's long. I don't know, because it's so sporadic over when you're going to do it. But let's say 30 minutes a day. Live Arena. This is an interesting one because Live Arena just falls for me at times when I'm not ready to do it. And so I don't really do it. I'm literally just, and because you go down so fast when you don't do it, I feel like I've got zero incentive to do it. The only reason why I need to start doing it is because I actually do want to get Marius, and I get blocked by Marius. So that's a kind of, for me, it's like when it's active, should I do it? On the free to play, again, it's good rewards early on. I did it a fair bit. But if you actually actively play your hits, your 10 hits in a day, then, you know, you could be looking at, call it 3 minutes a hit. So 30 minutes of play, I think's fair. So a decent chunk of time if you do it. Could even be longer, honestly. Depends what level you're at. Depends what sort of, you know, enemies you're facing. Depends how actively you're playing and how actively they're playing. So that can be, you know, anything around that sort of amount of time, I think. The marketplace, again, complete trash. So two big ones then. Two big newer ones they added, I guess. Hydra. Hydra runs generally are long. Okay? Hydra runs are long. Yeah, I'm in a clan, and actually, as a clan, yeah, everyone's like, look, we want to start pushing more. Okay, and they're building out these Yannicka teams, and they're building out the Trunda teams and that sort of stuff. You know, it is a chunk of time. 3 keys in a week. I'd say if you manual in any form, each key can be up to, this is endgame, up to an hour. I think for me, I manual a couple of the teams, or I manual parts of the teams. I'm like semi-active. I'm clicking on heads. I'm recovering if I need to recover. I think from a late game point of view, this is potentially, I'd say at least 2 hours of gameplay. This one flexes tons as well, by the way. If you're very early game, you literally go in there, you do your minimum to get Mithrala, if you're even able to. Mithrala fragments, you probably do 1 hit. You've only got enough champions to do 1 hit. And it's probably like 6 minutes. Yeah, but into mid-game, that 6 minutes might grow a ton. And it might be 6 to 60, let's say. So, again, massive variance depending on what level you're at. Sintranos is kind of the same as that. 8 keys in a day. If you are fighting Amius on his own could be a half an hour fight, depending on what you got built out for it. If you're just going through like the trashy stuff and you've got decent teams, then it might, I probably spend on average 20 minutes a day when I'm doing my 8 keys. And then when I feel like I've got a chunk of time, I'll take Amius down. So if you're in this hard area, and I completed the whole thing, the first wave of the Cursed City, I could spend an hour comfortably on one level, just trying to get the right RNG, trying to get those stun sets to stun, all of that type of stuff, trying to get the cooldowns at the right place, easily an hour on one level. So that first month, I mean, I don't even know how many hours I spent in Sintranos. I mean, ridiculous amounts. But I don't do that on a month-to-month basis. I tend to complete everywhere, try and get myself some of the boss chests, try and get myself the red levels, kill Amius, and then I decide whether or not I want to go any further. So that's a personal thing, in terms of the time that I'm willing to give it. And I know that some people, I know Earbad, for example, clears it every single time. Grim Reaper clears it every single time. So depends on how much of a completionist you are, right? So from a late game point of view, on a daily basis, I'd say 20 minutes is minimum. And that can go easily up to, I mean, it could go up to, honestly, 3 hours. Depends what sort of player you are. But I'd say on average, let's say could go up to an hour. For an early game player or an early to mid, you're probably doing normal. You're probably just clearing the first chunk. And then eventually you get to a point where you can't do any. Yeah, I mean, free to play. I'd clear a few. I'd try and get the rewards that I could. Again, you might come in and try and experiment. And when you get new champs, try different stuff. But again, this could be anything from 10 minutes up to 30 minutes, I suppose. So already we've got, let's call it 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe the best part of 7 hours at the high end of gameplay. And even if you're playing the Hydra is over 3, so I should split this over 7. So let's call that, yeah, that's not fair. Let's call that more like 20 minutes a day. And let's call that, I guess, more like 10 minutes a day, right? So that's not fair. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Call it more like 5 to 5.5 hours a day if you're playing as an end game player trying to complete stuff. And I guess, it could range in the lower end. And this is more where I'm at, I would say. I'd say I spend more like maybe 2 to 3 hours of actual gameplay. Yeah, 2 to 3 hours where I'm actively doing stuff. Some of it is on another monitor or whatever, but probably more like 3 hours, honestly, of playing the game. So someone earlier game, you're talking what, 1. So this could be up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, same sort of thing. 6 to 7 as a very active player. And I know on the free-to-play challenge, we would surpass that by some, by the way. If you were really grindy in this game, you could surpass that by some way. But even as a more casual, if you're just trying to do everything, it's still, what, 1, 2, call it 2 hours as a casual, if you're just trying to do the main stuff in the game. So I think JDX has got a point. I mean, it comes down to, like, how much do you want to play a game as well, right? So how much free time do you have outside of work, you know, perhaps in your lunch break, all that sort of stuff. I think 2 to 3 hours is not an unhealthy amount of time to play a game. I think it's kind of about where I'd pitch where I think we should be. If there's something we fun to do for our kind of like hobby time. I think 5 hours, 5 to 6 to 7 is not a sustainable amount of time to play a game around a life, around, you know, this demographic for this game is slightly older. So you probably, most people that play the game probably got families, or, you know, they're in that kind of like stage of life where they've got families and kids and stuff, probably got a job because then they can afford to actually play this game and all that type of stuff. So, you know, anywhere over 4 hours, I think is becoming pretty unhealthy for a hobby. And that's the danger, I guess. And I think that's what JDX is calling out here, because we've now got this new mode, which feels like on balance, on visuals, it might end up playing out a bit more like Sintranos in terms of, you know, playtime and activity. It's probably going to be chunks of activity like Hydra rather than every day, I think, but we don't know the details yet. But, you know, if we're adding another 20 to 60 in there, minutes, or even the 10 to 30 minutes, then basically something else has got to give somewhere. And that's, I think that's where Jay Diggs was coming at this. It's like, it's all well and good layering on these cool new game modes. Firstly, they need to be cool and new, not just skin and repeat. So, you know, I can see a big win for my personal view here, because I think this is the worst content they've ever dropped in the game by quite a long way. Mainly because it's just normal arena, reskinned. You do it 3 times. The only cool thing about this is it does force you to think about building out teams. But if they just picked a different number versus a different number, or they actually had a tag style approach to it, or even if they left it as it is, but they double the rewards and half the fights, I think that could be where you get this amount of time back that we're going to add through Clan Wars. I really hope they consider something like that, because this is a lot of time if people want to actively play it. And honestly, for me, it's once you've got Drex, you know, once you've got Drexar and you're playing on a day-to-day, I mean, you do get some good rewards in here, like Void Shards and stuff, and Sacred Shards. Like, the accessories are decent, but they're not what they used to be because there's so many more nowadays. You know, it just needs... The whole game mode and reward structure, I think, need a complete rehash. Just to, and it would be like you were dropping new content, in my opinion. Anyway, this is too long on a day-to-day basis for me. And is there anything else that we could cut back easily? I mean, I guess having a time limit on Hydra could be interesting as well. You know, you've got I don't know, 5 minutes to do as much damage as you can. Could be a more interesting version of this rather than endless time. To give a healthy amount of time for a Hydra fight might also help with the Hydra Clash stuff, or form very different teams. Don't know. Maybe that's not the right way, but certainly Doom Tower with the extra keys could be massively reduced in time if they let you do one run which equaled all 15 keys. Yeah, so I think this is another area. But I think really, JDX has got a point. We're in levels of the very casual players are probably fine. But the casual players probably see it as a push on their time. And the super endgame or super active players probably feel like this is a bit much. And then a new game mode on top of that. Well, is that the tipping point where you start to lose players? I don't know, but it is definitely something to watch out for. So anyway, bit of a different one from me. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Are you comfortable with it? What sort of time do you think you put into this game per day? And yeah, I will see you in the next one.